Good morning and welcome in. This is 5 Clubs on Golf Channel.
You are a vital part of our game.
Thank you for having me on.
All the way to the green. Woo! Boy, was that fun.
I've always wanted to be on 5 Clubs. Thanks, Gary.
Good morning. Welcome into 5 Clubs. Great to have you with us. We are live on a Wednesday, our getaway day. It's our dog day here, around here. So not only Golf Channel, of course, PGA TOUR Radio, Channel 92, that's Sirius XM. I'm Gary Williams, and this program always brought to you by Century Insurance. That's right, this citrus tea, it tastes better in a Century mug. Everything they do will be better if you take the time to evaluate your business insurance with them. Not to mention the way that they invest in golf here with the USGA, with First Tee, and with the PGA Tour. Century Insurance right by you. It's great to follow some golf. The hotel planner, the feeder system to the DP World Tour. You talk about stories. Can you imagine traveling for a year on the Hotel Planner Tour? Not only where they go, but whether it's lifers who've been keeping the dream alive and the lights on for 20 years, trying to make it to the highest tour they can possibly make it. That's professional golf right there. All right, on this Wednesday, Gabby Herzig is going to join us. Of course, contributor here at 5 Clubs, but also one of the best writers covering the game of golf for The Athletic. She wrote the game story about Collin Morikawa's win at Pebble Beach, but she was also out there at the WM Phoenix Open and canvassed a lot of players about LIV and the return of Brooks Koepka, Patrick Reed. And I'm interested to hear what she thought were the most interesting perspectives from a lot of different people that she spoke to a couple of weeks ago, not to mention some other thoughts from her, not only on what Scheffler is currently doing, yes, already with the win, but also some other items to get to with, like I said, one of the best writers in the sport. And then, bottom of the hour, Gil Hanse, another 5 Clubs contributor. Always look forward to Gil entering his pick each week. He generally brings the curtain down. He's kind of busy. Well, I know that he was busy yesterday because it was announced with some photographs and also with some language about the work that they're going to embark on very, very soon at Spanish Bay, which is, when you consider the properties of the Pebble Beach company, that's the one that's always been kind of the sleeping giant. And certainly they had great intentions when it was originally designed and opened in the mid to late 80s. But now he and Jim Wagner and their great team, the Cavemen, have been given not a blank canvas, but they've been given license to make significant changes to that golf course and to do it expediently, because the intention is for them to be playing golf there in advance of the U.S. Open, which will be at Pebble Beach next year. So looking forward to talking to Gil about not only the first time he saw Spanish Bay, which I know was decades ago, but also the most important aspects and the key design things that are going to be different about that golf course starting in just over a year from now. The expectation is April of 27, you're going to play golf on the newly renovated and restored, including a whole new irrigation system, turf conditions as well. So Gil Hanse, bottom of the hour. Plus, we got picks, we got dogs, always. We got a full slate here on a Wednesday. And we're on the eve of a lot of golf. I mentioned the Hotel Planner Tour playing golf, leading into us here live on a Wednesday. But of course, Riviera. And I think Riviera is always going to be something that people will savor, whether you're out there and you're watching it, and hopefully they get good weather after some rain early in the week, but also what we can expect of it going forward, because it is one of the most important events on the PGA Tour. It currently is the last event of the West Coast Swing. And the guy who's the host of this event never won there, Tiger. Jack never won there either. And currently you don't have Scottie or Rory who have put Riviera on their resumes. So Tiger spoke yesterday, and look, he has mastered the ability to fill up notebooks without ever saying anything that is that illuminating. But that's one of the things about him, is that now he speaks more infrequently. And here were kind of the bullet points of the main themes of yesterday. This was toward the latter part of it, which I'm going to expound upon, and that was the idea of when could he play next And the question was asked by Todd Lewis. We'll get to that. He talked about time being spent with respect to the reconstruction of the tour and also the criteria for membership and what these events are going to look like in terms of field size. And it's a lot of Zoom calls, a lot of board meetings. He was asked about the Ryder Cup, and rightfully so. And I think it was interesting that he said that the PGA of America has reached out for his input, in addition to asking him very succinctly and with no ambiguity, please, will you captain the team? There's no doubt it's his to take or pass on. And then I thought this was really nice of him that he didn't just say, hey, nice win. He spoke at some length, and it wasn't so much beyond him talking about Anthony Kim's natural talent. And there's some good video you can find of Tiger and Anthony Kim together doing a clinic, and Anthony being his precocious self at that time, a very young man, blessed with, yes, that unbelievable natural talent. I appreciated the fact that Tiger talked about that everybody has struggles. Some, and it's all relative, but these whatever grade of relative you want to consider with respect to Anthony Kim, these were not relative struggles. These were life-altering, life-questioning struggles, and I appreciated what he said about him, not only in his congratulation, but his empathy that he shared. Now, let's get to something that I think is interesting, especially as it relates to him, because usually when somebody asks a question and the answer is no, that's it. Move on, that's the end of it. It's kind of like when George had relations with the cleaning lady on that episode of Seinfeld, and the guy who was the editor of Pendant Publishing said, you're fired. And George got up to leave, and he said, well, what about the Christmas spirit? Anything there? And the guy said, nah. And George walked out. See, that's what happens when you say no. There's nothing else to do. But when Tiger was asked the question by Todd Lewis, is the Masters off the table? His answer was no. So that didn't shut it down. That started the engine, folks. The engine is now in motion. And I think for the most part, it'll idle here because we're not going to get a lot between now and then. But what you have is just this much of hope. And that's all you need, right? Just ask Lloyd Christmas. That's all you need. And so by saying it's not off the table, it could mean the Champions Dinner is not off the table. Me being there and maybe playing in the par 3 contest on a Wednesday may not be off the table. But he was thinking grander than that. And that, to me, as we go forward with whatever his schedule is going to be, whether it be in a very abbreviated sense in 2026 and the years going forward, the only thing that I want, and he doesn't have to do anything to put a bow on anything, because as J.R. Mooringer wrote brilliantly and beautifully, as he does in every book that he writes, in the book that he wrote titled Sutton, time is a thug and a cold one. And it can be that way with the greatest, and it doesn't take away anything. But the idea that any level of artistry that remains inside of him, and believe me, the artist is inside, just can it be unleashed? If those things can be available for younger generations to see, and I think equally as important for younger players who those generations he spawned, if they're given that opportunity, and for all of the pomp and circumstance, and it was deserved for the 2019 Masters, I actually think the last chapters of artistry that he authored was at the Zozo, number 82, and then following that at the President's Cup in Australia. That was ground game. That was all 9 windows. And as Tommy Fleetwood said, who'd waited his whole life to see it up close and in person, he spent the last couple holes on that Friday at the Zozo thinking to himself, after Tiger opened bogey, bogey, bogey on Thursday, and he's going, really? I waited my whole life for this. And then it was unleashed. And he spent the last couple holes thinking to himself, what am I going to say to him when I shake his hand on this Friday afternoon? Because I saw what I dreamed about my whole life. And all he could usher to Tiger was an extended hand, and boy, that was something. And Tiger's response was, you liked that, didn't you? Yes, they'd all like it. We'd all like it. So that no didn't shut it down. It opened it up. And that is just another little storyline as we head eventually down Magnolia Lane. All right, we take a break. When we continue, one of the best writers, and we are lucky to have her sharing her thoughts throughout the year as a contributor here at Five Clubs, Gabby Herzig from The Athletic. We will touch on a myriad of topics with her, and then Gil Hanse a little bit later on. It's a dog day in the best way, picks as well. It's a Wednesday, live on Golf Channel and PGA Tour Radio, Channel 92 on Sirius XM. We're back with you right after this. Back in on a Wednesday here, Five Clubs live on Golf Channel and PGA Tour Radio, Channel 92, Sirius XM. This segment is brought to you by Peter Millar. So whether it's the sport coat, pocket square, the cashmere crew neck sweater, the Oxford cloth shirt, the slate gray slacks, the suede belt, the chukka boots, you can't see that. Just, I promise, it's all Peter Millar. You too can be all Peter Millar, because it doesn't matter whether you're a gas bag on television or you're a lawyer or whatever it is that you do and you're active in your life. They are the luxury brand to cover all of your needs when it comes to your wardrobe. Peter Millar and petermillar.com. You saw her introduction, her open. It's her read on the game of golf. And I must say, she was the best player among not only the contributors, but everybody who's part of Five Clubs in 2025. She's got competition now. She likes her competition because Mel Reid is now part of the team. Amelia Duran is part of the team. I tell you what, we could trot out a mummified state of somebody as our fourth in a best ball. We would have no problem. She, of course, is Gabby Herzig of The Athletic. She joins me now from New York City. How about our team now? Let's travel. Let's play somewhere.
Gary, I don't even want to be mentioned in the same sentence as those two. That is not even close to being a competition. So we're gonna leave me at the mid-am golfer level and speak about them in a different category. All
right. Well, I know that you played a practice round with Amelia at the mid-am last year at Monterey Peninsula. Mm-hmm. Anyway, look, it's great to get the perspectives of all these people who are so thoughtful about the way they look at things. And for you, it's interesting for me to ask you about, look, you have ambitions about certain people, certain topics you want to write about. Right now, how would you write about Scheffler?
Yeah, it's a great question, Gary. We as writers, I think it's a very natural struggle to, come up with new material when someone like Scottie Scheffler is winning every single week. But at the same time, the fact that he's doing what he's doing is remarkable in itself and kind of just speaks for itself in a lot of ways. Actually, my colleague, Brody Miller from The Athletic, wrote a really smart column after Scottie's win at the Amex about how, over the last two seasons, the 2024 season and the 2025 season, Scottie won so many times, but he actually had kind of impairments each of those seasons. In 2024, he was really trying to figure out those putting woes that kind of plagued him in 2023, switching to a mallet putter. And he still was able to win so many times while figuring that out. And then in 2025, he had a hand injury at the beginning of the season that really derailed him in a way that I don't think everyone quite realized. I think the off season for Scottie Scheffler is a really important time for him to build his body in the right way and really figure some things out and iron out the kinks that he wasn't able to do mid competition. So now in 2026, we're really seeing a freed up Scottie Scheffler and someone who, simply can't be stopped. I think at the Waste Management Phoenix Open, which I covered a couple of weeks ago, that first round, we all kind of saw Scottie not really looking like Scottie Scheffler, and then he ends up almost being able to win the tournament. So I think this year is truly one of those years where Scottie can't be stopped, and we're going to see the true maximum limit to his game.
I think, and I know you would agree with this with respect to Rory is righteous with elaboration. I think that Scottie Scheffler is showing righteousness with efficiency. Like, he's not curt, but he makes it clear, I think, in a succinct way, how he feels either about a question or about a subject. How do you feel about him finding voice in a space that, look, that was not the dream. The dream was not to talk. The dream was to play. How about him in the way that he shares now in an obligatory way every single week?
Absolutely. I think it's a really interesting contrast, thinking about Rory and Scottie and how they handle media and opening up about their games. I think Rory is someone who offers up information, will disclose something that's on his mind without necessarily being prompted to do so, because he just feels like that's something that people should know about what he's going through and what's going on in his game. Whereas Scottie is very much the type of player who will take your question at complete face value. And you have to think about that before you come up to, any press conference or post-round interview with Scottie Scheffler. I was actually talking to his dad about this in Phoenix and how I really try my absolute hardest to prepare questions for the number one player in the world that he can't poke holes in, because it is, it's absolutely something that we've seen over the years with Scottie is he's going to keep his cards close to his chest unless someone picks his brain about it. And that absolutely, I think, has something to do with how Scottie he was never seeking the spotlight, and he stayed consistent with that throughout the last couple of years of us seeing him at the top of the game. And I think that's actually really admirable for an athlete to really stay true to themselves in that way.
You wrote The Gamer a very thorough piece about Collin Morikawa's win at Pebble Beach. And it's not like he ebbed and went into some darkness. I mean, he was on the Ryder Cup team, he contended a lot, but he also had, for the first time, like friction with the media, and subsequently with some people who said you do owe more than just whatever your score is. What was the most compelling aspect of him winning again for the first time for someone like him? A while is a couple of years. What did you find most striking about crafting what you wrote about him crossing the line again?
Yeah, it's one of those tricky things where I think Collin came out on tour really rushing into the winner's circle and the status of someone who can compete every single week, win major championships, 2 of them before his 25th birthday. And I think that kind of maybe set expectations in his mind that were hard to match over the next couple of years when he was struggling, when he was trying to find his game and that consistency with his irons that led him to those levels of success so early. So I think the most compelling part for me was hearing him open up about how he really had to search for kind of that mindset shift. He talked about working with his coach, Rick Sessenhaus, to identify what actually might have been the difference between when he was winning all those weeks and how consistent he was to now. And it seems like it was really just this desire to go out and win, not care so much about the results in between, but every single shot, every single round, chase exactly the game plan that he needed to go and win a golf tournament. And for me, Gary, one of the most fascinating parts of the game is, for me, the mental side. Yep. So to hear a player like Collin, who hasn't necessarily been, in the dark the last couple of years, but has been struggling to get over the line, talk about what got him there, that's always enlightening to me.
When you were in Phoenix, one of the things you did was you canvassed players on the LIV return of Brooks Koepka and Patrick Reed. And look, I think for the most part, there's this feeling of harmony. I know that Hideki Matsuyama had some misgivings. I know that Wyndham Clark, and this wasn't some scathing indictment on their return. He's like, I'm not really sure. It's like, that's like the most challenging thing that we've heard. What did you hear in the conversations that you had from players about the pathways that have been created?
Yeah, I think that, those sorts of opinions, the Hidekis, the Wyndham Clarks, even Victor Hovland in his press conference in Phoenix, they kind of put it as, hindsight. In hindsight, yeah, like that could have been nice to be able to, take the offer and then come back. Like, why couldn't I have explored that option? I didn't know that was an option, which is totally valid, I think, opinion to have. But at the end of the day, I think the consensus, especially among the top players, is that it is a net positive for the PGA Tour and for them personally to have players like Brooks Koepka and eventually Patrick Reed come back to the PGA Tour purely from a competitive standpoint. I think that's the most striking thing to me, is that, we hear players toss this phrase out all the time of, we want to compete against the best in the world, but it is truly a pride thing for a lot of them. They want to be able to say at the end of the year, at the end of their careers, that they went out and beat the best players in the world week to week on the weeks where they set out to do exactly that. And I think that, that's one of those things that maybe got brushed over a bit in the conversation about how do we bring this game back together? Who are we benefiting in doing this? The fans were obviously probably the biggest motivator in that conversation, that we just want to watch all the best players playing against each other. But truly, those top players like a Max Homa, Ricky Fowler, those are two of the guys that I spoke to, really emphasize that. And actually, Max Homa spoke from a fan perspective as well. He told me flat out that he feels like golf was deprived of Scottie Scheffler versus Jon Rahm for the last couple of years, and what that battle could have turned out to be. So all around, I think PGA Tour players are starting to think that this is a net positive, and they're kind of putting those other thoughts aside about what could have been.
You know, I haven't spoken to you since the tour started running March is going to be major ad campaign. And since that time, you know, immediately afterwards, you get what I thought was the fuel to the conversation. Brandel filled up the tank for everybody, like only he can. Seriously, I think he's the only one, especially in the way that he expressed himself. And since then, the tour has had a media session talking about the upcoming championship and reemphasized, you know, their position about how you know, bullish they are about how special the championship is. How would you attack the conversation, the premise, as we get closer to it in terms of writing about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, you know, the tour has made very clear in this that they're not trying to declare the Players' Championship as a major. And so it is an interesting thought experiment to then think, you know, how does that get determined? And I think for me, it's a combination of listening to what the players think, listening to what fans think, and listening to how the media shapes the narrative around these major championships. You know, I think we heard Rory McIlroy say that having 4 majors really makes a lot of sense for the game. And I think you've seen that on the LPGA with the 5 major structure. Doesn't exactly, you know, emphasize those events in the way that they should be. So I think, in my personal opinion, the Players' Championship is not close to the same level as the 4 majors. I understand completely the arguments about the strength of field and the test and the winners that event produces. But until the PGA Tour invites all of the top players that deserve to be in that field, it can't even be considered a major, in my opinion. So I think those are the types of, you know, collections of thoughts that we have to bring to the table in order to determine this. It's not the PGA Tour's choice in being able to determine the players as a major championship. So to me, I would kind of, you know, go outside of the bubble here and not look to the PGA Tour to making that declaration, but to look to kind of the peripheries of the game.
Yeah, like you said, they're not declaring it. And you have great depth. I don't know if you saw when Blutarski screamed "food fight." He then got out of the way in Animal House. And when you scream it, you usually don't take a Jello to the noggin. Look, I think the whole thing is going to be very interesting, and you'll be right in the middle of it come Players Week, because it's bound to be asked, and the elaboration is going to come from the guy who's the boss when he speaks to the media. There are a couple other things as we get ready to put a bow on the West Coast. Is Chris Gotterup is somebody who has the optics. He's burly. He's got this. He doesn't saunter like Koepka, but he's got an athletic kind of frame of mind, and he's got, I think, aesthetics that you go, I'll lean into this guy. And now he's done something a couple times that people don't do much, which is win, and he's done it very, very quickly. How does he stay in the smaller bowl as a bigger fish? Do you think that he plays with an audience?
Yeah, I think the most fascinating thing about Chris Gotterup for me is, you know, he has this appearance of being the bomb and gouge type player, you know, bombing it off the tee, you know, spraying it everywhere and finding a way to get it in the hole. But he actually is a much more complete player than I think a lot of people think. He's really found a way to maximize his scoring clubs and his wedges and putter. And for Chris, I think the key will be, you know, he feels this level of freedom now. He's spoken about it a couple of times after winning Sony, after winning in Phoenix. He never exactly thought he would get to this point so quickly. So I think he's playing with that mindset of I'm playing with house money right now. Anything could happen. And so in order for him to succeed on that increased stage in the signature events, starting to play in featured groups with players like Scottie Scheffler and Jordan Spieth, as he did in Phoenix, really leaning into that freedom type driven mindset is going to be key for him as a player, and trusting all the work that he's done up until this point. I actually spoke to Joe Mayo in Phoenix about Chris Gotterup. He did a little bit of a 30-minute kind of picking his brain sort of session early in the week there. And Joe, who's known to be kind of one of the most provocative coaches on the PGA Tour, really pushing the envelope in terms of instruction, literally said to Chris, do not change a thing. Don't let anyone look at you or touch you. And that was another indicator, I think, of where Chris's game is at the moment and where it could go.
Before I let you go, I'm going to ask you about something I've never talked about. And I just thought it was unnecessary to talk about Charlie Woods. He's a kid. He's going about his way, finding his own path. And now the next step for him is going to be college golf at Florida State. You chronicled his recruitment. What did you learn during the process of chronicling him doing something that all elite juniors do, which is figure out where I want to go to school?
Yeah, I learned a lot. I mean, I think the kind of narrative around Charlie Woods, at least from the broader sports world, maybe not so much those of us who are familiar with junior golf and the landscape of college recruiting and what is required to land a spot at an elite level like that. But, this isn't something that was handed to Charlie Woods. It's very clear that he went out there and posted those results and worked on his game and honed his skills, actually very similar to what Chris Gotterup is doing with kind of being able to maximize his scoring clubs and getting it over the line in that way. And I think, writing about Charlie Woods is definitely, I think, a sensitive thing for me, especially someone who grew up playing competitive golf, knowing how much pressure it is to perform just for yourself, let alone the entire world watching you. I mean, one of the kind of elite coaches that I spoke to for that story just mentioned the fact that at 12 years old, Charlie Woods was going out and playing junior events, knowing that his scorecard might go viral on the internet. How do you compete with that in the back of your mind? So I think what I learned was that it just shows that extra level of competitiveness that he does have, and able to stay above the fray and really, just go forth and pursue his goals under that extreme amount of pressure is seriously impressive. So to anyone who thinks that, Charlie Woods might have been handed out these opportunities because he is Tiger Woods' son, really doesn't understand that it takes so much talent to even post the results and post the scores and numbers and get to the place where he is today.
Yeah, I would also say he's made good choices in terms of the hands that he's putting himself in. Trey Jones, his coach. And look, these guys, these young men and women now have representation. Alan Hobbs is going to be his agent. He also represents Miles Russell, Caleb Surratt. Alan is one of the good guys. These are good choices at a very young age. So, look, it's good to catch up. Look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks. Thanks as always.
Thank you so much, Gary. Have a good one.
All right, you too. That is Gabby Herzig, contributor here, and of course, all of her great work at The Athletic. When we continue, Gil Hanse, look, his work goes without saying, but where he's been entrusted to do the work with his great team, the next is Spanish Bay, and the work will commence very, very quickly, and the work will be completed very, very quickly. He joins me to give thoughts and details on what they intend to do at one of the most important pieces of property, not only in America, in the world when it comes to playing golf. He's with me next. 5 Clubs live on Golf Channel and PGA Tour Radio, Channel 92 on Sirius XM. Gil Hanse next. Welcome back in. Bottom of the hour here on a Wednesday. 5 Clubs Golf Channel and PGA Tour Radio, Channel 92 on Sirius XM. This segment is brought to you by Century Insurance. Their business insurance is what they do. Evaluate yours with them. They want to be right by you, and they are right by us. And with so many other great investments in the game of golf, long-term with the USGA, with the First Tee, with the PGA Tour. Joining me now, the announcement made yesterday, and now kind enough to share some details on what he, his partner Jim Wagner, and the Cavemen are going to embark on very, very quickly out at Spanish Bay, is Gil Hanse. And I'm sure Tracy's going, "You're home? Really?" This is like,
element.
Get a good look, take a snapshot. He's not on a bulldozer. He's actually at home. How you doing?
I'm doing great, although Mother Nature did interrupt that. So we should be working at Cobbs Creek right now, which is a great job because I get to sleep in my own bed. But we've got about 2 feet of frost in the ground and still about 4 or 5 inches of snow. So we've been locked out for a little while. So Tracy and I have definitely enjoyed being my time home.
Well, that's great. Gosh, Cobbs Creek, we could do an hour on that. That for another day. Let's talk about Spanish Bay because the announcement comes yesterday. There's some details at various media outlets, Golf Digest had, and they shared. And I want you to be able to elaborate on this. And this was Links Magazine, that the Pebble Beach Resorts and Gil Hanse will begin the comprehensive redesign of the links at Spanish Bay following the last round on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. Bobby Jones's birthday. The new course will open to the public on April 17th. You're going, well, what? That's 13 months. You've been in this time crunch before. You did it at Colonial between the last putt being held in a PGA Tour event and the first tee shot being struck the following year at the same PGA Tour event. So you know what this is about, and you can see some of the particular details about expanding green complexes, widening of fairways, adjusting contours, repositioning of fairway bunkers, and that is the details. But let's get some real detail. But Gil, let me start with you here, which is, when was the first time you were at Spanish Bay?
It would have been early 2000s. The American Society of Golf Course Architects, we had our meeting on the Monterey Peninsula, and that was the first time I played the golf course. So early, I can't remember the exact date, 2002, 2003, been a while.
Okay. Yeah, the first time I played it was 1993.
Okay.
And like I did what most people do, is that, gosh, let's touch them all. And you play them all. And look, the best intentions of some of the most important figures in golf in various roles, from playing to governance to designing of golf, were the brain trust behind it. When you guys go forward with this presentation, is what is going to be the finished product very much in line with what the presentation was the first time you shared your thoughts?
I mean, it was close. We hadn't worked out all the details yet, but I mean, just trying to understand the footprint that we were allowed to work in, because obviously it's an environmentally sensitive site. The history behind it, as you said, I mean, there are a lot of very important figures in the game of golf involved with the original design. So how do we honor that, look at those contributions? But I think, at the end of the day, the Pebble Beach company said, it's a 40-year-old golf course. We've got to look at redoing the irrigation. We've got to look at rebuilding greens. It's just time to do all this infrastructural work to it. So why shouldn't we analyze the architecture and look at what's transpired over the last 40 years and say, can we present something that might be a little bit more in vogue now, or at least from the standpoint of architecturally. And I think a lot of those elements were part of our presentation, to build a golf course that feels more natural, sits softly in the landscape, pays homage to a lot of the great classic golf courses, and certainly some of the other golf courses on the Monterey Peninsula. And I think that message resonated with Pebble Beach Company. And then, you talked about the timeline. Obviously, it's a resort, and they need tee times available. And so this is the first time, I believe, that the Pebble Beach Company has ever shut down one of their golf courses in order to do what we're contemplating doing out there. So it's an amazing commitment from their standpoint. But they looked at it as, hey, we're going to have the U.S. Open in 27. We're going to have a golf course in Pebble Beach that's going to be down for a period of time in order to prepare for that tournament. So we want to make sure that Spanish Bay is open in plenty of time to absorb some of that outside resort play during the U.S. Open.
When people see, well, it's the links at Spanish Bay, I know how much of a love affair you have with that style of golf, with the ground game. I know there was a lot of material imported during the original construction of the golf course. It's one thing in presentation. Explain to people how you achieved the turf conditions and the things that you guys are going to take on to give people turf conditions and firmness and bounce and open areas up that formerly were not available to them to play from, and make the ground an integral part of the experience. How do you achieve that?
Well, we've got to be careful, first and foremost, with the soil structure. And we've got to, where we find good sand, we've got to stockpile that and keep it and utilize it for capping. Where we find soil that's not necessarily of what we would like to present those types of turf conditions, we've got to kind of use that in the out of play areas to try to tie into the native surrounds. So I think the combination of that, turf selection, getting the place to, around the greens, getting the contours where you can take a putter, you can take a 7-iron, you can chip, you can have any option that would currently, is very difficult in certain green complexes.
Okay, we lost Gil there for a second. For all of his abilities, he couldn't keep a good Wi-Fi connection. Hopefully we'll get here reconnected with him in a moment. Let me just share a couple thoughts myself on something that I'm curious to ask him about. And when you talk about green expansion, one of the things that you read there, if you read what they're going to do, is expanding the green complexes and adding roughly 40% to all the green complexes. And that to me is very interesting, because unlike what he has been entrusted to do at so many of the great historic golf courses, is not through negligence in large measure, is reclaiming green space that had been lost for various reasons. Some of it as simple as mowing patterns through time. And I know that was done at places like Fisher's Island, and more recently getting to see the work that they had done at Seminole. They completed the front 9 this past summer, and then they'll be responsible for doing the inward 9 next summer. And the 7th hole there is one of the great examples of reclaiming something that had been gone. Gil, I think we've got you back here.
That.
No, that's okay. That's okay. When you're in a house that's older than the Constitution, you may have some Wi-Fi issues on occasion. Let me ask you.
I won't say what happened, but anyway, somebody tried to call.
I'll tell you what happened. Somebody who should just be watching this show interrupted your interview by calling you, because we've had that experience before. Is that fair? Is that a fair guess?
Sure. That's a good guess.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Yeah, so anyway, I apologize about that.
That's all right. I was just saying, Gil, not to interrupt what you were sharing about turf conditions and sensitivity to areas that you can cap sand. I was curious about the aspect of the green complexes. It's one thing, like, for instance, my childhood home. I was there in the fall when your team was working on reclaiming green space at Ridgewood Country Club that had been lost over time. Now you're adding green space that is not necessarily something that was lost over time. How do you go about the green complexes roughly adding somewhere in the neighborhood of 40% on average of green space that maybe didn't exist in 1987 that you're adding to it? Why is that different, and explain the process?
Sure. I mean, what we're treating is basically within the corridors, that we are dealing with, which I think the routing of the golf course is really good. It's really strong. So we've made a few little tweaks to it, but within the corridors, we're going to touch everything. We're going to reshape, we're going to regrade, we're basically going to push things around to try and get the golf course to sit, as I mentioned earlier, a little bit more softly in the landscape, tie into the native contours in a way that actually expands, we're not literally expanding the width of the corridors, but we think the effective width will be strengthened by softening the contours along the perimeter of the golf holes. And the same thing will happen with the green complexes. Every green complex will be reshaped, rebuilt, mostly in the same locations, but elevations will change. Some of the greens will sit a little bit lower to the ground. Some will still remain high up above. So I think that variety, we're basically treating inside the corridors as a new golf course. And what we believe is that expanding these greens by 40% is going to provide more opportunities to move hole locations around. I mean, we've had this conversation before about the opportunities for width and angles and hole locations, and the ability to have larger greens and shift hole locations around is going to provide us with those types of opportunities. So in the focus in the green contours, again, greens that are much more reliant on slope as opposed to undulation, again, feeling a little bit more classic in their presentation. And then ultimately having the ability in the surrounds of the greens that you can play any different option of type of shot into them. So I think reimagining the entire corridor inside of the corridors is going to be a brand new golf course is probably the best way to explain that, as opposed to what we did at Ridgewood, where it was a restoration of trying to work within the context of what the original architect did.
Last thing for now, you have been given license with respect to one hole, will be an entirely new hole, the 13th. Just give a little bit of color on what you and your team would like to achieve there.
Yeah, I think when we looked at the entirety of the property, and you just showed those images, I mean, it is perhaps the most spectacular site for golf anywhere, and so we're excited about that. But taking the 13th hole, which is currently inland in the trees, removing it from the routing, and then taking the 14th hole, which is currently a par 5, and turning into a par 4 and a par 3, and then moving the tee for the new 14th hole over to the location where the 18th green currently is, so that'll straighten 18 out as well. Gives us the opportunity to hit a shot directly down the beach visually from the new 14th hole, and we thought that trade for the current 13th hole was a really positive one. And you know, what we've been able to focus on is really trying to maximize the looks and the views over the ocean, but more importantly along the beach lines where you can actually see the surf crashing on, you know, the waves coming in. I mean, it's one thing to look at the ocean on the horizon, but to actually see where it meets the land, I think, is really a much more interesting and certainly much more dynamic presentation.
Well, a year on the Monterey Peninsula is not a bad way to spend a year. Whether it's Childress, Texas, or Monterey, California, yeah, you find a way to make it special. I know that the Pebble Beach company, your team, very excited about something that is one of the most special pieces of land, like you just said, to build golf holes anywhere in the world. Thanks for taking the time. Best to the boss there at the home office.
You got it.
Okay.
All right. Sorry about the interruption, and always good to be on with you. Cheers,
all right.
Gary.
There is Gil Hanse. Again, the links at Spanish Bay. Him, Jim Wagner, and the Cavemen. Huge, important project. Those are winning words presented by Century Insurance. They want to be right by you with your business insurance needs. When we come back, our picks, including Gil's, for the Genesis and dogs. Back with those right after this. Back in here on a Wednesday, our getaway day. This segment brought to you by Peter Millar. Peter Millar and Dogs. When I walk my dogs, I'm ensconced in Peter Millar. That's true, because everything I wear, whatever it is that I do, they have me covered. The luxury brand that covers all of the things that you need to wear, including, obviously, everything you would wear on the golf course. It's petermillar.com. All right, if you have a dog that you take to the golf course to watch golf with, send the photos, send the video to dogs@fiveclubsgolf.com. We love honoring those creatures every single week. So here we go. Release the hounds on a Wednesday. First up is Christine Koselniak's dog. That is Weller. Now, Weller is a 15-month-old Aussie Doodle, starting him young with golf and working on the putting indoors during the dead of winter in Waterville, Ohio. And Weller said, I've had enough. That's Sydney and Corey. That's Neil Little's dogs, a Belgian Shepherd, and Corey is a Cardigan Corgi. Dogs are not allowed on the golf course, so this photo is taken in front of the Halfway Snack Shack at the Track Golf Course in Langdon, Alberta, Canada. It's winter time for Bunker. That is Dr. Greg Samuelson's Dr. Sam's dog. That is Bunker. Is a wire fox terrier that is in Clarinda, Iowa. That's cold. And that is Annie. That's Lisa Lively's dog, an 8-year-old veteran and year-round player at Buffalo Peak Golf Course in Union, Oregon. Look at that beautiful landscape and that gorgeous, gorgeous dog. That is Annie. Those are your dogs of the week. Send them to us Give us all the color, everything that is associated with them in the game of golf, and you, dogs at 5clubsgolf.com. Speaking of dogs, we were awful last week. Dogs with fleas, our picks. So by virtue of that, here are our standings, just very stagnant. Not a good performance in the first Signature Series event. Taylor out in front with $1.5 million. Jay, Emma, Gil, myself, Keith, and Brendan. He loves the anchor position. That's not a good position, Brendan. At some point, maybe you'll realize that. So with that, here are our picks. I'm going with Patrick Cantlay. So is our expert, Keith Stewart. I will say this about Patrick Cantlay. Shot out of a top 10 last week. Only 100 putts for the week. Third best. Hit 18 greens on Sunday. And oh, by the way, 6 of his last 7 starts at Riviera. 17th or better. And is a great mid-iron player, which is critical. Gil goes with Tommy Fleetwood. Scottie Scheffler, the first person to play Scheffler. And if you're going, why don't you play Scheffler every week? We can only play him 5 times for the whole season. So Fleetwood for Gil and Taylor. You can see Keith Cantlay like myself. Sam Burns for Jay Billis. And Brendan plays the Rory card. It is interesting that Scheffler and Rory, look, they haven't played there 20 times each. Neither one of them have won there. Tiger never did. Doesn't mean he doesn't love it. Rory loves it. So does Scottie. Jack. They have been unable to unlock all of the keys to that glorious Rubik's Cube that is that great golf course out there in Pacific Palisades. By the way, before we're done, we had Bo Welling on the show. How about him sending me this great Palmetto Curling Club t-shirt? He is the president of World Curling, which has been one of the great events at the Olympics. Enjoy all the golf. Have a great rest of your week. For all of us here at 5 Clubs, we'll see you next Monday, folks.